Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ins Division. I'm Glenn Reynolds. Well, higher education is in the news, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Naomi Schaefer Riley blogs at naomiriley.com. That's her website anyway. And she's the author of The Faculty Lounges and Other Reasons Why You Won't Get the College Education You Paid For. And also, most recently, of Acculturated, a collection of essays on pop culture published by Templeton Press. Welcome, Naomi. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, is the higher education industry in some sort of a crisis? Even 60 Minutes is now asking if college is worth the money.
Well, if it's trickled down to 60 minutes, I guess it really must be a crisis. Yes, in terms of the money, it certainly isn't a crisis. The states simply don't have the money to keep pouring into the state universities. Unfortunately, I think the federal money flow is not stopping, but certainly a lot of parents and students are beginning to question where their money is going. So financially, it's certainly in a crisis, but I would argue that it's been in kind of an educational and academic crisis for a lot longer than that.
Well, that's right. We talk about the higher education bubble as a financial bubble, which of course it is, but there's been an intellectual bubble for quite a while. However, I'm told we have special, secret PJTV video of important budgetary decisions being made at the highest levels of higher education right now. So roll this.
Tomorrow we start tearing down the college.
But Professor, where will the students sleep?
Where they always sleep, in the classroom.
Groucho made a good college president.
Yes, yes, very true to life. No, I think for a long time what we've had is a problem of mission at a lot of these schools. So what people think that they're paying for largely when they pay for college education is a piece of paper that says I am ready to be a professional and join the middle class. And colleges have sort of had a monopoly on that. They've been able to say we are the institution that will stamp that piece of paper and say that you're ready for a professional job. Unfortunately, it hardly seems like you have to spend 4 years and upwards of $200,000 sometimes in order to get that. And what actually goes on in those 4 years, I think you learned, especially from last year's hit book, Academically Adrift, is that students aren't really learning a lot more during those 4 years than what they started with.
No, that's actually exactly right. In fact, I've got a book of my own coming out very shortly called The Higher Education Bubble. And one of the things I suggest is that if the real function of college is primarily to provide certification, that people have some sort of minimal level of competence and sort of middle class ability to show up on time and behave appropriately, that it's an awfully expensive way of certifying people that could really be replaced by something that would probably be both cheaper and better. Would you agree?
Sure. Yeah, it actually used to be done by high schools, of course. You used to be able to learn enough reading and writing and arithmetic and also showing up on time kind of skills in high school that people used to take you for professional employment right out of high school. And they used to train you to do whatever it is, the job that they wanted you to do. But now colleges are sort of, in many ways, I think, operating a scam. They like to talk about how they're teaching you, skills for jobs that don't even exist today because you'll never know. And I really think that this is a load of what. I think if the jobs don't exist today, then they don't know the skills to teach, and you should just wait till you get on the job. It's the job of employers to teach you new computer programs and that kind of thing. It should be the job of colleges to make sure that you come out being able to write well, which many employers complain to me that students cannot do when they finish school, to read well, and to do some basic computational math well. But many employers report that this is simply not the case for most college graduates.
That's right, and I think that's a good thing to clear up. A lot of times when people criticize education, it sometimes comes across or gets interpreted as suggesting that the real problem is that liberal arts degrees are stupid and that people should be going to school in engineering. But I think what's really happened is a good rigorous liberal arts program that teaches you how to read and write and think critically is great. But what's happened is the quality of those has declined very drastically, whereas the quality in the science and engineering areas has remained fairly steady. So that's the real comparison, is that there hasn't been the great inflation and the standards dilution in, say, aerospace engineering that there's been in so many humanities departments.
I I think that's true. And the other thing that you've seen in the humanities and the social sciences is sort of a move toward the absolute peripheries of these subjects. So you get more and more obscure topics that students are spending their time learning, and they're not really, reading. I don't just mean the core texts of Western civilization. I mean, they're not getting sort of the basic fundamentals that you used to be able to get in freshman and sophomore years of college. They're moving straight on to sort of the most obscure topics, and they're lacking a lot of the foundation, and they're also certainly not getting those important skills that we were just talking about too.
Do you think federal aid has damaged the mission of universities?
Yes, I mean, I think what's happened is the federal government, of course, in this third-party payer system, has said to colleges, you charge whatever you want. We'll continue, paying whatever the difference is between what you think families can afford and what we want to and what they can actually and what you're actually charging. But what's happened with a lot of this money is that colleges are just looking for new ways to spend it. I mean, so they'll add departments, they'll add professors, they'll add new programs, and it sort of gets, I think, further and further from the core of their missions. And so there is a definite connection between the financial incentives in place and what's actually happening with the content of education.
Yeah, it's interesting because my own field, which is law, while it's got its problems, and Brian Tamanaha's got a book coming out next week about those problems, it's been more rooted to reality than a lot of areas in the humanities. And I think that's because our law students have to pass a bar exam which is written and administered by somebody other than us. So there's at least that external constraint. In the humanities, there's nothing like that, and I think people are basically free to do whatever they want and then call it an education.
I think that some kind of external measure, some kind of external accountability is very important. I mean, some the British system and some other European systems have at least the professor is not giving the exam, so there is some agreed upon body of knowledge that people who say take psychology 101 have to understand by the time they're done with psychology 101. Whereas if you just have a professor making up the exam at the end, they can just say, oh, I focused a lot on Pavlov's dog, so I'm just going to ask you lots of questions about Pavlov's dog. One thing that you've seen in in online education and for-profit education is this focus on accountability, and many college professors like to complain about how it's so rote and it's not creative enough for them. But on the other hand, people who pass a certain class at the University of Phoenix have the same knowledge or were required to do the same kinds of things that everybody else at the University of Phoenix who took that class was required to do. So it does provide you with, I think, an important measure of accountability that you would get in, say, a bar exam kind of a situation.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And interestingly, I was talking on here a few months ago with Andy Rosen, who's the president of Kaplan, and they use that standardized course content and the fact they have so many students taking it to do really deep statistical analysis of sort of what works and what doesn't, and how changes in presentation or stuff play out not just in the class, but in classes students take 2 or 3 courses down the line in a sequence. And I think actually that's kind of a killer app for them. I think that's something that traditional universities just aren't set up to match. Now, if you were the higher education czar, we've got so many of them, why not have one more? What would you do to fix things?
Well, as I wrote in my recent book, one of the first things I would do is eliminate tenure, and this, of course, puts the academy up in arms. But I think it's at the core of so many of the other problems in higher education. So, for instance, I think the tenure system is at the core of the problem of how much we focus on research over teaching in higher education. There was a study that came out in 2005 that suggested that for every additional hour a professor spends in the classroom, he or she will get paid less. So given that I think our undergraduates are sort of sorely lacking in terms of their education, I would like to really kind of limit the focus on research. And there are other reasons, I think, to eliminate tenure as well. I think the faculty generally at universities, just basically have the staying power. They can, they can really block any kinds of reforms, whether they're curriculum or cost reforms or anything else, because they know they'll be there longer than the students and the parents and the administrators and the board of trustees. And so I would like to sort of shake things up by eliminating tenure, going forward at a lot of universities.
Well, that's something a lot of people propose. Of course, I have to say, for right-leaning faculty at universities, which are almost exclusively left-leaning, that sounds a little scary. But there you are. Last question: what should parents and students, and for that matter, taxpayers do if they want to address this problem?
Well, there are different sets of questions. I mean, I think actually, if you did want to address the tenure problem, it is most easily addressed at the state legislative level. And I do think that legislators, as much as colleges like to decry them as kind of know nothing types who don't care about education, really need to think hard about the budget situations. I think parents need to, and students too, need to think a little bit more about their higher education. I mean, in some ways we obsess over it, but I tell this story. A couple of years ago, I was on a commuter train out of New York, and I was listening to two investment bankers on their way home, and they were talking about how they were going to both take their daughters to visit colleges in the middle of the summer. And I wanted to jump over the seat and sort of shake them and say, well, what would be the point of that? Why are you going to go visit a small liberal arts college in the middle of the summer? There's no teaching going on. You won't meet any students or professors. You're just going to look at the scenery, and then that's how you're going to decide how to spend your money. So I think even the most educated classes of our society are not really thinking about college as an educational endeavor. And as much as you want the credential, I think it would be worth kind of thinking about this a little harder.
Well, I think people are thinking about it harder, and in fact, this whole question has gone from an obscure topic on a few blogs to, well, as you say, it's trickled down to 60 Minutes now, so we know it's practically old news. So people will talk about it a lot, but thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us about it here today.
Thank you.
And that's Naomi Schaefer Riley. She blogs at naomiriley.com, or that's her website. And she's the author of The Faculty Lounges and Other Reasons Why You Won't Get the College Education You Paid For, and most recently of Acculturated, a collection of essays on pop culture published by Templeton Press. Well, thanks to all of you for tuning in here. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.